You're on mute, Khyati. Khyati, you're on mute.
Thank you. A very good evening to everyone. We welcome you all to our another exciting webinar discussion on ensuring child safety, well-being, and protection of rights with Jo Chopra. You all are muted for now, and you will have the option to unmute at the time of question answer round at the end of the session. Till then, we request you to write your questions in the chat box. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jo Chopra. Jo Chopra is a writer who has been working in disability for the past 30 years. Born in the US, she has lived in India since 1981. She is co-founder and director of Latika Roy Foundation in Dehradun. LRF is a non-profit which provides services to disabled children, adults, and their families, as well as advocacy and awareness in the community. So over to you, Jo Chopra. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, wrong one. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming on a Saturday. It's always quite a sacrifice to give up our free time, but I appreciate it. I think it's really sad that we have to talk about child protection as often as we do, and I wish that it weren't the case, but it is. We live in an imperfect world, and the task of keeping our kids safe and happy is one that I think every one of us here in the group today takes very seriously. Building a safe and a happy world for disabled children is even more important, because as we know, disabled people are 3 times as likely to experience some kind of abuse in the course of their lives as typical people are. So how do we address this issue is one of the really burning issues of our time. I think all of us fall into the same category. Anybody who's working in this field in an organization will have some kind of a policy. But I think that most of us are like this little girl with her head in the box. We think our policy is covering everything. We think that, you know, we've got it all under control, but a policy is only as good as the ability to understand it. If people just see it as something that we have to do for compliance with the donor's requirements or with the law or for our own well-being, but we don't really follow it, we don't know it well, we don't revisit it frequently, the policy isn't worth the paper that it's written on. I think we were at that point maybe 15, 20 years ago, and we thought we were really doing well where child protection was concerned. But when we were faced with our first actual incident, we found the policy was no longer useful for us. We had cut and pasted it from some other organization's policy, and it really had never been fully embedded in the way we thought or acted. So I think many organizations have that same problem. And I would like to address, how do we make our policy a living, breathing document that we all understand from the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top of the organization, that it motivates us, it inspires us, it holds us accountable. That's what a good policy does. The issues around child and vulnerable adult protection are huge. They are so complicated, and you really only begin to understand them when you're faced with a case, when you suddenly find that maybe a staff member has been doing something that they shouldn't have been, or you see something in a child that really gives you concern. And then you suddenly realize, I don't know how to handle this. The more we practice, the better we get at it. And we have to practice and we have to get better because the stakes are so high. It is children's lives we're talking about. Children's development can be arrested by an experience of abuse. Children can die because of abuse. Children can be made absolutely miserable. Their lives can be devastated because of abuse. The stakes are simply too high for us not to get this right. In the ancient times, when cartographers were drawing maps and they hadn't yet explored the whole world, there were whole areas of the map which had dragons on them, and sometimes the legend that said, "Here be dragons." And what they were conveying to the people looking at the maps was that part of the world we don't know yet. We haven't been there. We can't say, but we know it's dangerous. Cartographers would no longer be able to get away with that today. We all know what the world looks like. We know where the islands are. We know where the dangerous shoals are. We can no longer say, "Here be dragons." And as people working in the field of disability, we can no longer ignore the dragons that are out there waiting for our kids. We have to face the dragons so that our children don't. This is the kind of approach we took for many years. We saw the child as weak and vulnerable and innocent and looking to us to protect them. And our protection really, we felt, stemmed from our love for them, from our embracing them, from our compassion, our tender hearts. And that's how we approached the whole issue of child protection. And we thought that that was really enough, that if we were kind, if we were loving, if we didn't allow any kind of violence in our organization, they would never be affected by violence, at least with us. Now we've taken a different approach. This is now 10 years on from the time that we first really began taking child protection seriously. We are much stronger now. We address it with a kind of fierceness, of an awareness of what is out there. What are the dangers that children are facing? And how do we equip ourselves with power and strength to protect them? But also, how do we equip the children? How do we help them find their own inner resources so that they can be safe? How do we develop that sense of boundaries, that sense of, this is my body and that's as far as I will allow you in. This is my boundary. We have to teach kids that. But as long as we see them as this tender, vulnerable being, we limit them. We have to make them participants in this whole process. Otherwise, we're robbing them of the chance to stand up for themselves. We have a long way to go. And I think any organization that thinks that it's got it down, that it's written a good policy, that it's got all its systems in place, I think we're fooling ourselves. We are constantly learning. Everything that we experience gives us more information. Every time we have had to face an incident, we have a meeting afterwards to discuss what went wrong. What did we not do? What did we miss? How did this happen that we hadn't seen it earlier? And that's really important. Having a sense of humility in an organization is crucial to developing better systems so that kids can actually be fully protected. So let's get started today. Let's begin again, as we have to begin every single day, fresh, with open eyes, with open hearts, and with a sense of humility that we are here for the kids and we are constantly trying to get better at what we do. So the plan for this session is first to look at what abuse actually is. What are the main kinds of abuse? How can we prevent it? What are the things that we can do with our kids, for our kids, with our families to make sure that it doesn't happen? But when it does, how do we recognize it? What are the signs we should be alert to? If it happens, what should we do? How do we address it? And finally, how do we bring our policies into the workings of our everyday lives as organizations? The World Health Organization defines child abuse as all forms of physical and emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect, exploitation that results in actual or potential harm to the child's health, development, or dignity. It's a pretty good definition and it's pretty all-encompassing. So let's break it down a little bit and get a little bit more specific. because we're dealing with something which can permanently affect a child's brain. Abuse causes fear, causes stress. And when that builds up to a point in the brain, it can actually cause changes that cannot be undone. So we have to take it extremely seriously. The different types of abuse, as listed by the WHO, are physical abuse. Anything that harms a child's body, whether it is beating with a hand, with a stick, with a belt, whether it is burning a child, pouring scalding water on a kid, making a child sit in the hot sun, making a child sit in the cold without adequate clothing on, starving a child. Anything that results in pain to the child's body is considered physical abuse. Emotional abuse. Children grow up sometimes in homes where they hear constantly what a waste of space they are. They hear from their parents or their caregivers that I never wanted you in the first place. What are you here for? Why are you even insisting? These kinds of things, if children are told they're no good, they'll never amount to anything, that is a kind of an emotional abuse. And it can, in the same way as physical abuse, actually harm a child's development. Sexual abuse is not just penetrative sex, whether that be oral sex or anal sex or vaginal sex. It is also any interaction between an adult and a child, which is sexual in nature. If an adult forces a child to fondle him or her, look at them while they're naked, force a child to behave in certain ways and photographs them, all of this is sexual abuse. It doesn't have to just be the act of penetration. Anything to do with sexuality and an adult and a child is sexual abuse. Neglect is one of the forms of abuse which is often neglected. We often don't think that neglect is a kind of abuse because we tend to associate it with poverty. And parents can't help it if they can't feed their children, if they can't get them to the doctor. But it still is actually a form of abuse. And we need to see it that way. If we see a child who comes into school dirty or hungry or not wearing appropriate clothing, a child who's sick, kid who comes into school with a fever and the parents haven't bothered to take the child to the doctor, this is neglect and this is abusive. And finally, exploitation is thought of by many people as another form of abuse, forcing young children to work when they're too young to do that. Depending on children emotionally, when they're too young to be an adult's emotional support system. These are kinds of exploitation which fall in the category of abuse. And the children and adults who are most at risk, we all know, are disabled. They are 3 times as likely to experience abuse in their lifetime. Some of the other risk factors are a history of domestic violence in the home, alcohol or drug abuse, always problematic, and can cause people to behave in ways they might not normally, but they're no longer responsible and they may harm a child. Mental health problems, primarily in the caregivers, but it could be another family member who can be violent at times and maybe takes it out on the child, or a caregiver who's under a lot of stress. And many of the caregivers that we all deal with, because they're dealing with disability, are under a lot of stress. So these are risk factors that we have to always be aware of. I want to stop here for a second and just acknowledge that dealing with abuse is extremely painful, distressing for all of us. I am also aware that in India, 2 out of 3 people have experienced abuse. So that means that on this call, where we've got 80 people, how many of you have experienced abuse? It's a huge percentage of our audience. I'm not good at math, so I'm not able to do it in my head. Probably 67 people on this call have experienced some kind of abuse. That's a huge number, and it's something that we are always aware of. When we talk about abuse, we have to be aware that there are people listening who may be triggered by what is being said. Painful, traumatic memories may be coming up for you right now. And I want to acknowledge that pain. I want you to know that we care. And because of this, it's extremely important that if you are dealing with an abuse case in your organization, that you take care of your own mental health and your team's mental health. Dealing with it, even vicariously, for a child that you care about is intensely traumatic. And everybody on the team who deals with it directly must take that time. It needs to be worked into the schedule to check in for your mental health, to take care of yourself, to do whatever it is you need to do to make sure that you get past that. And if anybody needs to take a moment to turn off the sound for a bit, please feel free to do that during this presentation if it gets to be too much. Recognize your own limits. In these kinds of situations, strong policy is our best insurance. I think about it like a fire drill or an evacuation drill. If we have never prepared for an emergency evacuation in our homes or in our organization, when something happens, when there's an earthquake or a fire or a gas leak, everybody will panic because we've never practiced it. We've never figured out who is going to do what. And we all just start running around like headless chickens because we don't know what to do. A policy is like an evacuation drill. We practice our evacuation drill at the Latika Roy Foundation frequently. And the reason is because when, God forbid, an emergency should happen, we don't want to be inventing things right on the spot. We want to know exactly what to do. So when we have our evacuation, nobody knows, is this real or is this just a drill? And that's the best situation to be in, that you are so tuned into your protocols that you know just what to do. When you have to deal with a child protection issue, there are going to be strong emotions that are evoked. It's inevitable. You're angry, you're enraged that a child has gone through something as painful as this, and you want to kill somebody, and you're flooded with your own traumatic memories. That's not a good place to be making decisions from. But when you have a strong policy, you can make the right decisions because you just go through the protocol. You follow your own rules. And later on, you deal with your emotions. But in that moment, you deal with your policy. As everyone knows, prevention is so much better than cure. And prevention of child abuse starts right at this age. It may seem strange, but this little baby can be taught right from the beginning to trust his own body, to trust what he's feeling inside, and begin to know this is me and that is you. This is my boundary, that's your boundary. And that's going to help that child stay safe in later life. But what do we do to this baby? So frequently, we say, I'm hungry, so you have to eat. And we shove that spoon into the kid's mouth forcibly. What are we telling the child? I know better than you do what your body is telling you. I know better than you that you're hungry. You're telling me you're not hungry. You're howling. You're trying to resist that spoon coming at you. But I'm ignoring you and I'm saying, no, I know best. I'm feeling cold, so you're going to wear a sweater. What are we telling the child? You know best. I'm the mother. I know better than you do what your body is feeling. And slowly, through these kinds of repeated interactions, we train the child not to believe in their own body signals, in the things that protect them, the things that keep them safe, that prevent them from overeating, getting overheated, or going to someone that they don't feel comfortable with. How do we talk with our kids and our vulnerable adults when they tell us, I don't want to sit on Chacha's lap. I don't want to give that auntie a kiss. I don't like her. And we get all excited because what's Chacha going to think? What's auntie going to say? Who cares what Chacha thinks, what auntie says? I'm worried about my child, and I am trying to help my kid establish those boundaries that say, I don't like you. I don't feel safe with you. There may be nothing wrong with Chacha or with auntie. I'm not saying that the child is an accurate judge of who is abusive and who's a predator. But the child is an accurate judge of what feels right to him or to her. And we have to trust that and let the child build that up so that they do develop those skills of saying, no, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel comfortable. Listening to what our kids are communicating is so important. And so often we are more tuned into our own voices. We think we have so much to teach them. We have so much to tell them. We have so much to guide them. And we neglect that easy relationship where trust is built. If we can help children to communicate with us about the easy things, they will be much more likely to communicate with us when something bad happens. They'll know to come to us immediately. They won't feel they have to hide it from us because we're not going to judge them. We're not going to blame them. We're not going to make them feel that they did something wrong. Build that close, easy relationship with your students, with your own children, and that will serve them in good stead when or if something terrible happens. So what if it does happen? What if you've worked really hard to build the child's boundaries, to help the child know what they like, what they don't like, built that relationship of trust, and yet still something happens? What are the signs that we should be looking for? One is any unexplained mark or injury, any unusual pain when the child is moving or sitting. They may not tell you about it, but their behavior may indicate that something's wrong. I'm just not able to settle. If they're often dirty or hungry, they're not wearing the correct clothes for the season. If they have health problems that are not being attended to. If they're talking a lot or acting out abusive behavior, maybe in their play, maybe with other children, maybe with dolls, maybe in drawing, maybe in verbal communication. If they have an unusual interest, keep going back to it. Somebody hitting somebody, somebody beating somebody, somebody tying somebody up. If they keep doing this, make a note of it. This is something to investigate. If there's a sudden drop in their abilities, in their skills, they used to be able to feed themselves, suddenly they're not able to. They used to be reliably toilet trained, suddenly they're not able to let you know in time. They don't want to go home. They start getting edgy as we get closer to going home time. Or they flinch when a certain person comes into the room, maybe a staff person they don't feel comfortable with. They have some unexplained disturbance in their behavior, in their sleep patterns. Maybe they suddenly start falling asleep in class. Maybe someone's troubling them at night. Maybe they're too scared to sleep. Are they looking for too much affection, too much comfort? Do they keep coming up to a grown-up and staying by them, not wanting to leave their side? Or are they not willing suddenly to trust grown-ups? Or are they too willing to trust grown-ups? Do they go with someone they've never even met before? These are signs that we should be worrying about. And of course, self-harm always warrants looking into. If a child says something, or if you see something, find somewhere quiet. Don't do it in front of everybody else. Find a quiet spot where you can have a conversation. Take a deep breath. Stay steady. Calm yourself. Center yourself. Take a moment or two before you begin to say anything. Because again, all those traumatic memories of your own, all your own feelings of anger are coming up now. Recognize the feelings. Remind yourself that you're here, you are safe, and you're here for the child. The child is looking to you for reassurance and a sense that this is going to be okay. If you freak out, if you lose your cool, the child may get the message that something terrible has happened and that you can't even control it. Even you, the person they've come to with this problem, even you don't know what to do about it. Their world may have fallen apart, but they've come to you to bring it back together again. So you have to be that strong anchor for them. Listen to whatever they're communicating. Accept it. Believe it. false accusations are very, very rare, and particularly with disabled people. Believe what they say. Reestablish safety. Make the child feel safe in that moment, that nothing bad is going to happen to you. I'm going to take care of you. Help the child to communicate whatever it was that happened, but don't lead them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about open and closed questions in the next slide. No blame, no judgment. This is not the time to say, I have told you 1,000,000 times, don't open the door if I'm not home. How many times have I told you not to go with a stranger? You know you shouldn't have been in the bathroom alone with him. This has no place. Do not bring blame or judgment into this. Comfort the child. Praise the child for telling you. Remark on the courage that it must have taken. Tell the child how brave they're being. And when it's over, make your notes immediately. Don't wait. These may be very important if there's going to be a police investigation. You need to have your information. The marks, what you saw, what the child said, anything that can help. Make sure that you make notes. You'll forget it. It will get jumbled up in the number of times that the child is going to tell the story. And if it's relevant, if you feel you can't handle this on your own, ask someone else to come in and help. I just want to talk a little bit about open versus closed questions, because we often see people jumping to conclusions and then what we call leading the witness. Did daddy hit you? Was this your brother who did this? Who did this to you? You know, all of these things scare the child, and they get you the kind of information that's not particularly useful. You want the child to tell you what really happened. So open questions like, I wonder how that mark got on your leg. Oh, I see. What happened then? Could you show me? Could you maybe show me with these two dolls? Could you draw a picture? You're just gently eliciting information from the child without imposing your thoughts, your beliefs, your idea about what might have happened. This is very important for getting the right information from the kid. Anything to do with child abuse is confidential. It is not something we talk about in the staff room or with our neighbors or back at home with our family around the dinner table. This is something that is earth-shattering for the family in which it happened, and it must stay private. So only the people who absolutely need to know need to know. So we do not talk about it with other staff members. We don't talk about it in our homes. We simply keep it to ourselves in a vault. We don't share it. Our child protection policy is long and detailed, but the heart of it is this one line. If you see something, you say something. And this is not easy. It sounds very simple. It's not simple at all. And anyone who has gone through any kind of a situation, particularly in an organization where you're working with people that you may end up having to accuse, this is extremely difficult to do. These are some of the things that we start to think, and we really go right back into that little girl in the box situation. We just don't want to have to face it. I can't handle it. Everybody's going to get mad at me. It may just make everything worse. The person, and it's my friend, may lose their job. There's no point. Who's going to do anything? The police really don't ever take any action. It's only the one time. Maybe I'm overreacting. All of these things and many, many more come up when we are confronted with a child abuse situation that we suddenly have to deal with. It doesn't matter what we think. We have to report it. This is at the Latika Roy Foundation. Everybody knows to whom they have to report. Everybody doesn't have to act, but everybody has the responsibility of reporting. And if it's sexual abuse, the reporting is mandatory under POCSO. We all know this is often non-kibaste, that nothing really gets done. Often you go to the police station to report this case and they won't even file it. they'll tell you, no, the family has to make the complaint. All of that is not true. They have to file an FIR, but they will do everything in their power frequently not to do it. Why do we still do it? We do it because this is the only way the system is ever going to be made to work. Nobody wants this to come out. Nobody wants to have to deal with sexual abuse or other kinds of abuse. But the only way that we are going to become a society that can deal with it is when we stop the silence, we break the silence, and we start to talk about it. So we go and we report these cases, even though we know there's a good chance that nothing's going to come of it, or that it's going to be worse. We also know that removing a child from a home where most people in the family love her, because there's a predatory uncle that nobody is willing to do anything about, may put her in more danger. We know that. We still have no option. We have to do it. And the only way that we're going to break the cycle is when we make the system work for us. Here in Dehradun, an organization that many of you are aware of, Arunima, had a case where a young woman who lived at Arunima went home for a holiday. Her parents enrolled her in a local organization in Lucknow. She was raped, she was made pregnant, came back to Arunima where it was discovered. And of course, Arunima went through the whole process of wondering if it was anyone at their staff. Everybody on their staff agreed to do, the male members agreed to do DNA testing. They found none of them were involved. It was the organization in Lucknow. The parents and Arunima fought that case, and that man who raped that young woman is now in jail for life. So it can work. The system can be made to work, but it takes courage. It takes determination. But the only way it will happen is if we begin. We can't just throw our hands up and say, there's nothing that's going to be done. Childline is a better option. Even though we have to report to the police, we can also call Childline for further support. Childlines are different in different cities, and some are better than others, but overall, we've found Childline to be superb, really, really helpful, very resourceful. So I recommend that in addition to reporting it to the police, you also report to Childline and see what they can help you do. As an organization, if any staff member is found guilty of child abuse, we have to report to both to the parents and to the police. This is an organizational requirement, and if we don't do it, I, as the director, could be in jail myself. This is a responsibility, and we have to do it. So all of you who are here in your capacity as organizational people must be aware of that. So ultimately, what we're saying is that child protection is everybody's job. And it's not just at work. We are trying to create our own little army. We have a team of 120 people. Everybody is trained. Everybody knows if you see something, you have to say something. And they know that this philosophy is not just about the disabled children and vulnerable adults that we work with. It's in their own families where 90% of abuse takes place. It's in their own neighborhoods. It's in the communities that they live in, the churches that they go to, the temples that they visit, the organizations that they are a part of. They have to take it there as well. And they feel this. They feel this kind of sense of mission, that this is something we have to bring about. We must make this change happen. So we put it in every aspect of our foundation's functioning. It's the top line on our website, child protection, our code of conduct, anybody can download it. Our child protection policy, everything in Hindi and in English. It's there on the website for anyone to use. In our recruitment, it's an integral part of how we recruit new staff. It's part of the interview, and we give people case studies. What would you do? You want to be a bus driver here. What would you do? What would you think if you saw this situation? How would you handle it? We want to gauge people's sensitivities. Are they open to this kind of responsibility? We don't expect people to come trained, but we do expect a kind of openness and willingness to learn and to take this seriously. Our reference checks always include that question. Is this a person that you would be comfortable leaving your son or your daughter or your grandchild with? The answers that we get for those reference questions tell us a lot. Police verification, obviously, because we're working with children, has to be done. When we tell the candidate that this is going to be protocol, a candidate who has something to hide is going to withdraw their application. They have to sign the policy in our presence. And we tell them as they're signing it that your name is on the line here, your integrity. This is your own sense of honor that you are signing with, that I believe in this philosophy, I will follow this code of conduct, I will follow this policy. And then our orientation is intense. What does child protection entail? Our child protection officer sits with every new person and helps them understand the policy. Staff training is ongoing, both for the entire staff as a group, as well as for individual groups, depending on what their job is and what their capacity for learning new approaches is. Our appraisals are linked to child protection. So nobody gets an appraisal until they have taken our quiz and passed it. And this quiz changes from year to year. It's a new one. You can't get all the answers and then just put them in like that. We change it every time. And the idea is that you will not get your appraisal, which means you will not get your increment until you have passed the quiz. We're not interested in finding out what you don't know. We want you to keep taking the quiz until you get it right. You can take it 10 times, but we want you to understand the questions and the answers. You can see it on our website, latikaroy.org, Child Protection Quiz. And we never miss an opportunity to spread the word. Wherever we go, when we talk with students in a career fair, when we talk with our colleagues and they're doing disability forums, when we talk to parents, when we talk to professionals, every chance we get, we bring up the issue of child protection. Even if what we're being asked to talk about is something totally different, we still bring up child protection because it has to be on everybody's mind and something that everybody realizes is important. We owe it to our kids to do this, and believe me, they are counting on us. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for this wonderful session, Ms. Chopra. So we look forward to have the questions from the participants. As I can see that we have no questions in the chat box, we'll further take the questions. Yes, okay. So Lavanya, I'll unmute you. I'll unmute the participants so that we can take up the questions. Lavanya, you can unmute and now we can take your question.
Sorry about that. Good evening, ma'am. It was really nice hearing you. Lavanya is my daughter's name, and she's 13 years old. Like you mentioned in the beginning about understanding child's needs and helping them to communicate. Like my daughter does have issues not being able to communicate her hunger or not being able to answer questions like yes or no. I'm trying with her, but sometimes it becomes very difficult, and as a parent, I'm unable to understand what is it that she wants to say. Is she understanding what I'm trying to say? Can you just throw light upon that, how to go about helping her a lot more easier to be able to communicate better?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess it's really the core of everything that we're doing in our work with disabled children. and adults, we often get asked questions about behavior challenges, and we always bring it back to communication. Because if a child is behaving in a way that we find challenging, they're actually trying to tell us something. They are communicating through their behavior. Something is distressing them, something is making them very happy, something is overstimulating them. And we have to learn those skills if the child isn't able to communicate in the way that we can understand. Everybody is communicating all the time. And it's really up to us to fine tune our understanding so that, and I get what you're saying about sometimes not being sure. And I think this is what parenthood is all about. It's that journey of trying, keep on making the effort and checking with them regularly. Is this what you meant? And every child is going to be different. Every kid is going to present us with different opportunities to learn. And I think if we approach it in that way, that this is maybe somebody speaking a different language or using techniques that I just haven't learned yet. And if we go into it with that kind of an openness, the chances are better that we will we'll be able to get past the barrier. I know that it's not always possible. There are times that we will be baffled and we will be really left wondering if we're doing the right thing at all. But I guess in those situations, we then just have to keep doing the best we can to keep the child or the adult safe and to make sure that in whatever way possible, we are providing them with whatever they might need, whatever they might be asking, so that they're not in a vulnerable situation. I know this isn't a great answer, and I would love to hear from some of the rest of you. If anybody else has any ideas to share with Lavanya's mom, because this is key. This is what it's all about, particularly for our children and adults on the spectrum.
Like you said, as a parent, to be able to always engage the child in conversation, because it helps the child to listen, understand, reciprocate. I do kind of occasionally, where I feel that, yes, my child is kind of responding, I do ask her questions, and she's quite prompt. She just tell me, yes, I don't want this, or I want to see this, or I want to eat this. She is quite communicative, but in certain places like hunger or say suppose sleep, where she's not sleeping properly, she's not able to tell me what is bothering her, or if she's suppose doesn't want to talk to anyone, wants her own quiet time, she's unable to tell me that leave me alone for a bit. So these things happen. In certain places she's quite communicative, but in certain places I think she's just not able to understand how to reach. So that's where I want to find out.
This is really interesting, and it seems like you have really followed her very observantly. You've paid attention. You've got the idea that, okay, maybe you recognize it a little bit after it's happened, where she has that meltdown. She's so hungry, she doesn't know how to tell you she's hungry, but she needs food. I remember this happens with my granddaughter. She's only 2, and my daughter says it's so delicate. I have to give her the food just before she freaks out. If I wait even a minute, then nothing is going to work. She's so hungry she can't even eat. And so it's really up to us to pay so close attention that we know before it happens, and then not to always be the one who then anticipates it for her, but to narrate it for her, to say, you see how much better you feel now? You're eating and you're feeling better. Next time, maybe you could ask for something to eat or have some fruit out so that she can help herself. That you work around her inability to anticipate it for her and make the situation such that she has a way of accommodating that thing that she can't even identify as hunger. You name it. You tell her what that is. Ooh, that feeling that makes you feel crazy, that's hunger. And the best way to handle hunger is to eat something. And, so that you work it out in whatever way is effective for her. but you've already gotten there. You have already recognized that it's sleep, it's food. So these are things that then you take them a little bit further back and find the strategies there.
Also, ma'am, there's one more thing which kind of, I mean, I am worried. Sometimes when she's able to communicate, then it's easier. But when she's not able to communicate, how should our language, how much should we say, how much we should not say and wait? Because sometimes when you go on and on, it's too much for them. So it's like how much you should talk to be.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you do feel it's too much overloading of information on them.
Yeah.
So how to trim your question down so that it's easier for her to give you an immediate answer or think about it and then answer. So
practice. Yeah.
Also, ma'am, could you also help me to understand how I can understand my child's sleep patterns, because it gets too much, because she's been having these issues since her childhood and not being able to tell.
I think some of these very specific issues, maybe we want to make this a broader conversation here. Other people may have some questions that are more generalized. I think it's very difficult to give this kind of advice without knowing your daughter.
Yeah, sure, ma'am.
Thank you, Lavanya. Moving on to the next, we have a question from Shubhangi. Shubhangi Vedya is asking, when disabled children become adults and go out in the community, their behavior may be misunderstood as having sexually abusive intent, example staring, etc. How to work with this?
Interesting question. Shubhangi, I bet you have an interesting answer. Where are you? Can you unmute yourself? Shubhangi, can you unmute?
Yes, I've unmuted. I'm right here.
Hi.
Hi, Joe. If I had the answer, it's actually something that is very worrying, particularly people who are on the more able end of the spectrum, if you will, who may seem very, very, non-disabled to look at superficially. Yeah. And it's particularly, in the context of misconduct being such a serious thing now. So if a young adult really has no intention of making those kinds of overtures in a public place, but yet might get into very serious trouble.
Right.
So that is pretty worrying.
That's a really, does anyone have any thoughts? I actually have to think about this before I could say anything useful, but others of you may.
Hello, I'm Shubhangi's son.
Hi, Vishwas.
I'm Vishu. My name is Vishu.
Vishu, okay, nice to meet you. Thanks for taking part.
Mom?
Yeah, Vishu, can you mute yourself?
Hello?
Is there anyone who can add to this? I actually don't have an answer.
Hi, Joe. This is Nandita here.
Hi, Nandu.
Such a fabulous lecture. Thank you so much. And lovely questions from Lavanya. Shubhangi, that's really such a, I would say, important and sensitive question. And, this, because of poor social understanding, many kids with autism can engage in behaviors which actually they want to be friends, but it can be perceived as intrusive and even obnoxious. So there's a lot of information on social thinking. One of the great things about people with autism is, a lot of their thinking is so rule-based, which is actually an asset, because you can break it down into rules and they will follow them really well. So, right from understanding body language, how do you start a conversation? How do you know if someone wants to talk to you or not? And, even from little children. So, I mean, some of it is paid, but there are open source resources. There's Social Thinking by Michelle Garcia Winner. She's done fabulous work across all age groups. The books like Are You a Social Detective, Whole Body Listening. And then there's this really nice program. I'm getting a senior moment right now, but it's So Safe. Yes. It's entirely based on visuals, where it's just so beautifully done. It was developed by the people who in Australia, and then it was bought up by PEX, the people who created PEX. So it looks at all kinds of interaction. So people are taught, like, how, first of all, the categories of people in society. So who's known, who's unknown, who are community helpers, and so on and so forth, and what kind of interaction you can have with each of these groups. So who can you say hi to, who can you wave to, who can you hug, who can you kiss, and it takes you right from a friend up to intimacy. And consent, it teaches you about consent. Consent means I say yes, you say yes, we are above the age of 18, and even people with moderate intellectual disability have been taught how to use it. So there are resources out there which all visually based, and more than emotions, because even this good touch, bad touch, first of all, is horrible, because there's it's very hard to judge. Then emotions, what the other thing is to say, like, what makes you feel uncomfortable, and it may not make you feel uncomfortable. So that also is not very effective. So it has to be rule based, and that seems to be better for many people. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nandu.
Thank
Stay
you.
there. She's like my twin. You can see we look exactly alike. So you
I'm
answer
trying
for
hard
me.
to copy you, but I don't have your lovely jewelry. And thanks, Joe. Thanks.
There are a couple of other good questions here. Sometimes parents tend to overlook an act of patting or a peck on cheeks by someone not familiar to the child. Does that come under child abuse? Or is it just a casual behavior by someone, especially in the case of a disabled child, where, in my experience, it goes on well into adulthood, that Moi Moi used to be manhandled by people on the streets. And I got to be very aggressive, actually, in stopping them. I would just go into get out of here mode. I couldn't stand it because she didn't like it. And I think this is something that we can do from a very early age. When people kind of get in children's faces and demand that they speak to them, or that they introduce themselves, say hello to auntie, namaste, and all this stuff that kids are instructed to do, we can actually respect children from a very early age by asking them, would you like to tell auntie your name? And if the kid doesn't want to, then we say, sorry, she doesn't want to tell. It's her name. Why should she have to give it to every auntie who asks for it? And it's not necessarily rude. It's just, you would like to have somebody just walk up to you on a bus or on the street and demand to know what your name is and touch your face. Can you even imagine it? Why do we tolerate it for our children? But it happens all the time. And I think these lines do need to be made clearer to people, that our kids are not to be touched and manhandled and spoken to by anybody. They need to be treated with the same kind of respect that we want. What do we do if staff members report that teenage students and adult trainees touch them inappropriately? Or if some student has a crush on a staff member? How do we deal with both these groups? I had crushes on so many teachers when I was in high school. I'm sure most of us did, right? Men and women. I was absolutely insanely in love with my English teacher, who was a woman. And, it's just, that's what teenagers do. That's part of being a teenager. And I think that staff have to be clear about boundaries and make it overt if you have to. We got the message pretty clearly from body language, and they just didn't respond to us. but because our kids are disabled, they will take longer. They may need to actually have it be spelled out for them. But that's something that staff need to learn to do. Some of my team members are here today from our vocational training center, and it's something that we deal with all the time. And I think that this is just the name of the game of adolescence, that people do have intense feelings, and it's nothing strange, it's nothing abnormal. We just need to help them see where the boundaries are. The resources, yeah, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Yes,
Lavanya?
we have question from Mitu Di in the chat box.
Okay, sorry, I missed it. Can you read it out?
Mitu Di, she's asking that what do we do if staff members report that teenage students and adult trainees touch them inappropriately, or if some student has a crush on a staff?
Okay, I addressed the crush on the staff. The touching inappropriately, it's the same. It's basically the staff members have the responsibility to be very clear about their boundaries and inform the adults that this is not acceptable, that this is not tolerated, this is my boundary, that's your boundary. All of the same ways that you would deal with any other. Maybe Nandu can add more to this, but I think it's a very common situation with young adults.
Moving on to next, Lavanya has again raised the hand.
Jo ma'am, if you can help me understand this again, about like my daughter, she's understanding about social relationships in class, understanding what you can do with which people, but sometimes it's so difficult to make relatives understand how much you need to sort of maintain distance, how far you can go with the child in communication and showing some sort of any kind of social behavior or understanding the child's social behavior. How do you make relatives understand? First at home, and then definitely outside it becomes a different picture, absolutely. But at home, how do you make people, whether it's grandparents, uncles, aunt, anyone, how do you make them understand? Because I'm trying to, when she attends classes, understanding social relationships, definitely, she is becoming aware slowly. But then how do you make the relatives understand?
And I think we're often going against a lot of cultural norms when we bring these issues up. Even when we talk about boundaries, when we say she doesn't feel like that whole issue of a child saying I don't like to sit on Chacha's lap, and that creates enormous risks within the family. But I think these are things that we have to decide for our children, rather than worrying about what's the accepted thing in our families. This is how child abuse happens, that people give precedence to the family. What will people say? Log kya kahenge kind of stuff that keeps the silence, that keeps us in this same nightmare cycle that we've been in for generations, where nobody's willing to push back on it. It isn't going to be easy, but if it's a choice between our child and somebody who isn't so close to, I go with the kid. I mean, I would protect my child under any circumstances, and whatever works for them. I think we have to. Yep, we'll come to you in a sec, Vishu.
Excuse me.
Just one sec. I'm just finishing this question. Just 1 minute. I think that we have to prioritize their safety, their needs over the norms of society, and that's how things will begin to change.
Thank you,
Vishu, yes, you wanted to say something?
Vishu wants to ask the question. Vishu, you can ask your question, please.
How does the autism, hello everyone, my name is Vishu, but I'm Shubhangi Vaidya's son. So I work in Aadhaar Vocational Center in detailed courses and also in Club Youngistan, and I'm also studying for NIOS.
Okay, great. Very nice to meet you.
But Monday I take a break from Club Youngistan. Other days I attend the session of Club Youngistan.
Okay, great. That sounds like a packed week.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vishu.
Hello, Khyati ma'am. Hello, Nidhi ma'am.
I wish you.
Do we have any other question?
I actually have a question. I was just wondering if there are some ideas or some things that you could share where parents could also be, as parents, and for us as professionals, that we can tell our parents what they could be doing.
Okay, everyone. Nice to meeting you all. I'm signing off. Bye.
Okay, bye, Vishu.
Thank you for joining me. Okay, so yeah, my question was that I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts or ideas around what as parents we could do to figure out if our child's rights are being protected, or is there neglect that's happening in school? Because very often we find that, especially because now we're talking about inclusive education, a lot of times what is promised at the point of entry or admission and what is happening is very different. But it's hard to figure out without getting admission in a school is hard enough. And then without sounding combative or confrontative, if you had any thoughts around that in terms of what as parents we could do, or even as professionals, things we can advise the parents we meet. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very delicate question, isn't it? We're in that situation with a whole bunch of children right now. And, the idea that they're just sitting in the classroom, not getting any real input from the teachers is a real problem. And we want them there, but at the same time, we know the school isn't really sold on the idea of inclusion. They're doing it because of whatever reasons they have. I hope other people will chime in here, because this is a thing that's an evolving saga for most of us. I think the best thing is working with other parents, because what happens when you bring disabled children into mainstream classes is the gaps in the classroom are in relief now. You can see the class for what it really is, where nobody's really getting the individual attention that they need, or the accommodation for their learning needs, their style, all of the other children who are struggling. If we can reach out to other parents and form pressure groups from the parents, it's the parents who bring about the change. When I talk to school principals who happen to be friends, and they say they really would love to do things differently, but the parents' pressure is so strong to focus on academics only, if you have to give up anything, give up sports and games, or give up art, give up drama. Don't ever give up math and Hindi and English. If the parents can be the pressure group that brings this about, that's what will make it happen. And I think if we can reach out as advocates for children to parents of typical children, so that it's not always about disability, it's about kids' right to learn. And there are so many learning styles. It's not just our disabled kids who are very obviously in need of attention and a different approach, but most of the kids, and you look at how many kids have visual impairment who have not been identified in a mainstream classroom, how many kids have ADHD or some kind of an emotional problem, how many kids are being abused and are coming into class with that anxiety and fear. And that's not ever addressed or even noticed by the schools. So if we can work with other parents, maybe I don't know what you think of that idea.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've been suggesting. I was just wondering if there were, you know, any thoughts around that. So thanks very much. This was helpful because it just reaffirms things, some of the things that we, yeah. So,
Shivangi, you want to
Shivangi,
say?
yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, post pandemic and post the lockdown, I mean, the classroom once again has become a very, very difficult space, I think, when so many kids who've actually had no experience of interacting with other kids at all, I'm thinking of little children in classes 1 and 2, are actually getting back into a social situation. And within that, I think, the difficulties of kids with disabilities are just amplified, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know how many of you saw Vibha Krishnamurthy's article in the Indian Express last week about how many of our kids loved lockdown, how they thrived while they were at home, and finally were able to focus on learning because they weren't focusing on social skills and the bullies and being afraid of what was going to happen to them. And they loved being at home for 2 years. So, I mean, this is all over I would say all over the world. Many children had great experiences by being at home, and now the pressures of being back in school are upon them. So yeah, it's a really challenging time for children who have lost out on, well, I won't say lost out. Many of them have gained a lot of confidence, and they've actually learned more effectively while they were out of school than they ever did within. And that is something that needs to be said more often. If that's been the case in your organizations or with your kids, write about it, share it somewhere, because this is really, I mean, our kids are like holding up mirrors to all of us to see what are we doing in our school system. If children learn more effectively at home, then what are we doing for them by bringing them all into the classroom? Let's, really examine this phenomenon and see if there's something that we could change.
So I think these were the only questions by our participant. So thank you so much, ma'am, for being a part of this great session by you. So we had learned a lot about ensuring child safety. So thank you so much for this wonderful session. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have tomorrow, we have another webinar on autism and mental health. We will be sharing the information very soon. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.